The Draconian Council Chamber fell silent as the hatchling was brought forward. Even by the standards of their ancient species, this one was remarkably unfortunate in appearance. Its scales were mottled gray-brown instead of the lustrous obsidian or ruby that mark noble lineages. One wing hung slightly crooked, and its snout was too short, giving it a perpetually confused expression. The creature's eyes were mismatched, one amber, one pale blue, and it stumbled on oversized claws as it walked. "Unacceptable," declared High Commander Thraxus, his crimson scales gleaming under the chamber's ethereal lights. "This hatchling brings shame to our clutch. By ancient law, it must be cast into the void." The assembled dragons murmured their agreement. In 10,000 years of civilization, the Draconians had built an empire spanning 12 star systems through genetic perfection and martial prowess. There was no place for weakness, no tolerance for imperfection. Zaya stood at the back of the observation deck, his jaw clenched. As the human ambassador to the Draconian Empire, he had witnessed many of their customs that turned his stomach. But this was different. This was a child. He glanced down at his daughter Elsa, who'd begged to accompany him to the council session. The 7-year-old pressed her face against the transparent barrier, her breath fogging the crystal surface. "Dad," she whispered, tugging his sleeve. "What's wrong with the baby dragon?" "Nothing's wrong with it, sweetie," Sia replied softly. "The dragons just think it's not pretty enough." "Not pretty?" Elsa's eyes widened in disbelief. She looked back at the hatchling, which had begun to make small pitiful chirping sounds, but it's adorable. Before Zia could stop her, Elsa had activated the barrier release, a security flaw he'd have to report later, and was running across the polished obsidian floor toward the center of the chamber. "Elsa, no!" Zia shouted, sprinting after her. The dragons recoiled in shock as the tiny human child burst into their sacred space. Several guards moved to intercept, but Elsa was already sliding to her knees before the hatchling, her arms outstretched. "Hi there, cutie," she cooed, her voice echoing through the stunned silence. "Don't be scared. You're the sweetest little thing I've ever seen." The hatchling tilted its misshapen head, regarding her with its mismatched eyes. Then, for the first time since its hatching 3 days prior, it stopped making distressed sounds. Its crooked wing attempted to flutter, and it took a tentative step toward Elsa. "This is an outrage," Thraxus roared, smoke curling from his nostrils. "Remove the human spawn at once." But Elsa was already gathering the hatchling into her arms. It was nearly as large as she was, yet she managed to cradle it like an oversized puppy. The creature's rough scales didn't seem to bother her as she stroked its head. "You're beautiful," she told it seriously, looking into its eyes. "Don't let anybody tell you different. You're perfect exactly how you are." The hatchling made a sound. Not a chirp this time, but something closer to a purr. It nuzzled against Elsa's chest, and a collective gasp rippled through the chamber. Dragons didn't purr. They certainly didn't show affection to other species. And yet here was this rejected hatchling, practically melting in the embrace of a human child. Zaya finally reached his daughter, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. He stood between Elsa and the assembled dragons, his heart hammering but his voice steady. "With respect, High Commander," he said, "I invoke the right of sanctuary under the human Draconian Treaty. My daughter has claimed this hatchling as kindred. By law, you cannot separate them without risking a ralliance." Thraxus's eyes blazed. "You would invoke ancient law over this defect?" "I would invoke any law necessary to protect a child," Zia replied firmly. "Any child." An elderly dragon near the back of the chamber rose slowly. Her scales were silver with age, and her voice carried the weight of centuries. "Ambassador Zaya speaks truth. The right of sanctuary is absolute, but more than that." She paused, studying Elsa and the hatchling. "When was the last time any of us saw a hatchling bond so quickly? Perhaps the humans see something we have forgotten to value." "Grandmother Sillex," Thraxus protested. "You cannot mean I mean exactly what I say. Young Thraxus." Despite her advantage, Sillex's voice cut like a blade. "We've spent millennia breeding for strength and beauty, yet our hatchlings grow colder with each generation. This human child shows more compassion in one moment than our entire council has displayed in decades. Perhaps that is a true weakness, not in the hatchling's appearance but in our inability to see worth beyond scales and symmetry. Elsa looked up at her father, confused by the draconic language, but sensing the tension. "Dad, can I keep him, please? I'll take really good care of him, I promise." The hatchling chose that moment to let out a tiny puff of smoke. Not a dragon's fearsome flame, but something more like a hiccup. Elsa giggled delightedly, and even some of the younger dragons couldn't suppress their amusement. Thraxus stared at them all, then finally lowered his head. "Very well. The right of sanctuary, Isaac acknowledged. But, Ambassador, your daughter takes full responsibility for this creature. His name is Spark," Elsa announced happily, apparently deciding this on the spot. "Because he's going to be bright and amazing. Just wait and see." As Zia carried both Elsa and the exhausted hatchling back to their quarters, he couldn't help but smile. His daughter had just accomplished what centuries of diplomacy had failed to do. She'd shown the Draconians that humans possessed something their advanced civilization had lost: the ability to love unconditionally. Behind them, Grandmother Sillex watched thoughtfully. Perhaps, she mused, the humans would teach them more than either species had anticipated. And perhaps this ugly hatchling, loved fiercely by a small human child, would prove to be the most magnificent dragon of all. In Elsa's arms, Spark purred again, his mismatched eyes already beginning to brighten with hope.